Welcome to the Qatar National Convention Center. Your safety and comfort are very important to us. With this in mind, we ask that you take a moment to watch this short safety presentation. Emergency exits are located throughout the venue and are easily identified by illuminated green and white exit signs. Please now take a moment to locate your nearest emergency exit. Remember, the nearest exit may be located behind you. For your safety, please keep all aisles and exit paths clear at all times. In the unlikely event of an emergency alarm, a flashing warning light will be activated. Please remain calm and listen for further instructions. If you are required to evacuate the building, an announcement will be made in both English and Arabic. In the event of an emergency evacuation, please move swiftly to the nearest emergency exit. Some venues, such as the theatre and auditoria, have illuminated escape path lighting to guide you to the nearest emergency exits. Please follow the instructions given by the fully trained QNCC staff and move quickly to the nearest emergency exit, following the signs until you are outside the building. Once outside, you will be directed to the nearest assembly point where you will receive further instructions. If you discover a fire, please raise the alarm using a manual call point. This will immediately activate the emergency evacuation sequence. All alarms will be responded to by the QNCC team. If you require first aid assistance, please approach a member of the QNCC team. QNCC is a non-smoking venue, and smoking is not permitted at any time in any part of the venue. Should you wish to smoke, please use the designated smoking areas which are located outside the building. Thank you for watching. On behalf of all of us at Qatar National Convention Center, we hope you enjoy a safe and memorable visit. Welcome to the Qatar National Convention Center. Your safety and comfort are very important to us. With this in mind, we ask that you take a moment to watch this short safety presentation. Emergency exits are located throughout the venue and are easily identified by illuminated green and white exit signs. Please now take a moment to locate your nearest emergency exit. Remember, the nearest exit may be located behind you. For your safety, please keep all aisles and exit paths clear at all times.
All right, welcome back. I'd like to invite you to take your seats. We're about to start our session. It's the special symposium of the World Medical Association. So please come on in and take your seat. We're about to start. And as this is the World Medical Association Special Symposium, of course, it's only right to also have the president of the World Medical Association here joining us today. Therefore, I would like to invite Dr. Lujain Al-Rothmani, the president of the World Medical Association, to the stage. She is also the international head of the Kuwait Medical Association, and she has, of course, many other functions, but for today, she is the WMA president. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ramin, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm honored to stand before you today on behalf of the World Medical Association, which is an international organization representing over 10 million physicians worldwide. On behalf of my colleagues, I warmly welcome you to our symposium that will address the questions: what are the limits of plurality for the global healthcare worldwide? I extend my heartfelt gratitude to the conference board and organizers for offering us this space and for allowing us to organize this symposium. Plurality in healthcare profession is a strength and a challenge. A strength because it really brings together diverse perspectives, experiences, and expertise, and really enrich understanding and enhancement of the quality of care that we provide. It fosters innovation. It fosters cultural competence and really a comprehensive approach for the health and well-being for all. But at the same time, it has challenges, particularly when we navigate around the several ethical dilemmas, cultural differences, and the varied practices around the world. And you're going to hear about that even more shortly in this symposium. If you look at the program, you will notice that most of our speakers are not from the World Medical Association. We invited pioneering experts to really share their insight on several issues that we have been discussing within the organization and beyond, such as conscious objection, informed consent, patient autonomy, and to really see and judge the ethical documents that we have within the organization to help us to explore and balance diversity with unity, respecting different point of view, upholding universal ethical standards. So thanks a lot for being with us today. In a few moments, my colleague Ramin will present WMA's core ethical documents. While we take huge pride in those documents that we spent so many years developing them and reviewing them, we truly believe in the power of collaboration and partnership. We recognize the importance of seeking feedback and insights from experts and different stakeholders within and beyond our organization. With the spirit of this inclusivity, we've convened you here today at this hall. We eagerly anticipate your valued inputs and feedback, and I encourage each one of you to ask the tough questions, to share your perspectives with conviction, so please speak up. I also want to take this opportunity to highlight that we are currently reviewing the Declaration of Helsinki that sets the ethical standards of the use of human subject in medical research. Now it's in the 8th review cycle. This flagship document has been used and been set as a reference in several countries and at several levels in setting ethical guidelines and legislation in many parts of the world. Our review process is not done behind closed doors. We seek different perspectives and different feedback from experts like yourself. Even though this document is not on the program today, I invite each one of you to visit our website, www.wma.net, And we will have access to the latest draft of this document, and you'll be able to provide your comments and your suggestion through our public consultation process. Given the acute crises that we face today, from the humanitarian crises, increased conflicts, climate change, the emergence of new technologies such as artificial intelligence, we really need to do it right. We must set the right ethical guardrails, safeguard human rights, and uphold the highest ethical standards. So let's just kick off this symposium with the spirit of collaboration and openness. Without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Ramin Parsi again to the podium. He is a medical physician and he's the head of the Department for International Affairs at the German Medical Association. I must add that he's a dear colleague and one of the leaders and experts when it comes to medical ethics at the World Medical Association, where he has chaired the working group on the International Code of Medical Ethics, the 7th review of the Declaration of Helsinki, and also a member of our Medical Ethics Committee. I always think of Ramin as the person to ask the questions when it comes to WMA ethical documents. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lujain, for this very kind introduction, and thank you for the kind words. Well, I guess my role here today is to set the stage a little bit for the next presentations and the panel discussion later on. Set the stage for the discussion to introduce you the core documents of the WMA, although I assume most of you know them very well. Real quick, my conflict of interest, and as Lujain has already mentioned, I have been a member of the WMA Council and the Ethics Committee and chaired the different work groups for the revision of the International Code of Medical Ethics, the Declaration of Geneva, and the past chair of the Declaration of Helsinki work group. And of course, in those capacities, I was representing the work group at different conferences such as these, and I got travel bans for that. And of course, because of these conflicts of interest, I might be a little bit biased. These are the learning objectives, but before we really dive into the topic, I would really like you to meet. I live in Buenos Aires.
I cannot even see the meeting room.
Huge soccer fans, okay? They always dreamt to go to one of the international tournaments, to the stadium, and see a live event in a stadium. They never made it to any of the tournaments in South America or the world. Now there's one coming up, that's the Euro Cup, and it is hosted in Germany, where I live. So Alvaro has diabetes, and he had diabetes for a very, very long time, and he has very weak kidneys because of that. And he was also even close to having to undergo dialysis. So they're a little bit worried if they travel to Germany now that Alvaro might need medical attention. And of course, they're very sure that the quality of healthcare will be fine. It will be okay in Germany. But Alvaro is a little bit hesitant because he says, you know, are the doctors there going to honor my patient autonomy? Are they going to honor informed consent procedures or my patient confidentiality? Is that all going to be exactly the same as what I'm used here at my family doctor or at the hospital in my city? Now, they have the tickets for Hamburg, that's the stadium Hamburg, and well, he might actually need attention at the hospital in Hamburg. And what do you think? Should the basic medical ethical standards be the same for physicians worldwide? Should Alvaro be able to expect the exact same ethical conduct from all physicians in Germany, regardless where the doctor's location, background, and beliefs is? And even with regard to the more controversial issues. Now, if I asked you in the room who would think that this should be the case, probably not everyone here is physician, but you probably still have an opinion. If you had to raise your hand, would you raise your hand? Yes, this should be the case. Great. I see many, many hands flying up, and I agree with you. And this has actually one of the main reasons why the WMA was actually founded to achieve consensus on high standards of medical ethics and professional competence worldwide. It was set up in 1947 in the aftermath of the Second World War and after the horrific ethical failures of physicians back then. Now, the WMA reaffirmed the norms of medical research and practice that must apply to all doctors, and most importantly, prevent that these breaches will ever happen again. So the main objective actually is to regain trust among patients for physicians. Today, the WMA represents over 9 million physicians worldwide and 114 national medical associations as its members. And in addition to ensuring the highest possible standard of medical ethics, it also puts a lot of effort into fostering best medical practice to promote health-related human rights for all people and to safeguard the independence of physicians. Now, the WMA has, of course, a lot of documents approved by its General Assembly, but there are 3 documents that outline the basic ethical principles for physicians, both in the clinical and the research settings. First of all, there's the Declaration of Geneva, which was the first document approved by the WMA General Assembly in 1948. It's the Physician Pledge, which outlines the basic ethical principles for physicians. It's very short and concise. And then 1 year later, the WMA approved and adopted the International Code of Medical Ethics. This code is based on the DOG, but expands on it a lot. It's the foundation of ethical principles defining the professional duties of physicians. And then for the research side, there is the Declaration of Helsinki. It was adopted a couple of years later in 1964. These are the ethical principles for medical research involving human subjects. Now, since those days, since the early days of the WMA, of course, you would all agree the world has changed significantly. There's an increasing global mobility, global intranational and international plurality in society that comes with it. And all that has an undeniable impact on medical practice. Now, medical ethics increasingly faces the need to consider a variety of ethical theories, perspective on, and convictions. And just take my hometown, Berlin, where I live now for more than 20 years. More than 10%, I think it's 12% of the physicians in Berlin are actually not trained in Germany. And if you look at how many patients are actually seeking care that come from abroad in Berlin, it's really huge and it's increasing massively. Millions of patients worldwide do the same in other countries, and the medical tourism industry is increasing double digits every year. Now, the WMA policies must respond to contemporary changes and challenges, especially those of ethical pluralism and globalization. And the WMA has always considered its documents as living documents. And if you see these core documents, how many times they were revised. And this is actually true with all the WMA documents, and there are a lot of them. If you see here for the International Code of Medical Ethics, it was most recently revised in 2022. This is the picture of the WMA General Assembly in Berlin in 2002, the Declaration of Geneva most recently in 2017, and the Declaration of Helsinki most recently in 2013. And as Lou Jain mentioned, it is currently under revision again. Now, what the WMA always does during its revision process, it makes really sure that the work groups are truly international. I just put the examples here for the International Code of Medical Ethics, which was most recently revised. If you see the names of the countries here, you can really tell they are truly international, with the representatives from Australia, Brazil, Denmark, Germany, Japan, Kuwait, Nigeria, South Africa, United Kingdom, US, and then very active observers from China, Sweden, France, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, and even a couple of other international organizations. We also held international conferences on almost all the continents, and we had public consultations where people from all over the world could participate, experts, stakeholders, wherever they were, they could participate online. Excuse me. And we had a circulation among all WMA members where, again, all the different members and countries could participate. And not to forget, for all ethical documents, the WMA needs a 3/4 majority by its General Assembly, so we really need a full support for all the ethical documents once they get approved. Now, if we look at the Declaration of Geneva in its last revisions, we can tell that the basic ethical principles of the DOG, they have never really changed since 1948. There has never been a real shift of paradigm during these revisions. There were only a few clarifications, a few additional provisions were added, but they were never really controversially discussed or criticized, in fact. It was probably the last revision which introduced the biggest changes for the Declaration of Geneva. There was the addition of patient autonomy and the addition of physician well-being. Both very well received, and the Declaration of Geneva was approved unanimously by the WMA General Assembly. Now, with the International Code of Medical Ethics, it was a little bit more extensive because, of course, it's a much longer document as well. First of all, the work group makes sure that it is compatible with the Declaration of Geneva, so all the additions of the Declaration of Geneva also had to be added to the International Code of Medical Ethics. And the work group made sure that it covers all the basic principles without going into too many details, because we didn't want to change the character of the International Code of Medical Ethics to let it become a whole book. It must be comprehensive, but it can't actually cover the entire WMA policy apparatus. So there were often critics that said we are missing a few issues in the International Code of Medical Ethics, but of course we focused only on the very basic issues, and for everything else there is, of course, policy of the WMA out there. But one thing that work group always made sure that the code should be applicable to different cultures and political and religious environments, and therefore we also had all these different conferences around the world to get the input, to learn from the different cultures and environments. Now, what the work group did in the very beginning is we looked into all the different duties, responsibilities, and interactions between the patient and the physician, between the physician and other physicians, between the physician and society, between physician and the profession itself, and for the first time also between the physician and organized medicine. And we looked into all these categories, and we actually restructured the International Code of Medical Ethics according to these categories, and the whole document was also refitted with a more modern and gender-inclusive language. Now, many of the normative requirements proved to be very uncontroversial for the International Code of Medical Ethics. They were underpinned by the 4 fundamental ethical principles: beneficence, non-maleficence, the respect for patient autonomy, and the requirement for justice and fairness. The last 2, they were newly added, or let's say more explicitly added, in terms of justice and fairness. So this wasn't controversial at all, and those were also augmented by 2 additional core ethical principles: the respect for human life and the respect for human dignity. Now, I guess we can say that there is indeed an undisputed core of global medical ethos. With these core principles, there wasn't much discussion. There were only small things that we had to sort out. It was just a little bit of fine-tuning of the language. So more or less, there is really an undisputed core of a global medical ethos. But wait a minute, what about more complex and controversial issues? Especially those issues where cultural and religious differences come into play. Well, what are those complex issues? Usually with those complex issues, the ICoME seeks a balance between stating unambiguous, specific, detailed duties versus providing more general accounts of duties that leave room for professional judgment and interpretation. And I've listed here those issues that were a little bit more complex or controversially discussed: informed consent, remote treatment, cases where confidentiality might be overridden. Those were a little bit more complex, but still we found good solutions for that. Then in terms of commitment of physicians to help in emergency situations, advertising and social media, and physician conscientious objection, those 3 issues, they were a little bit more controversial, and it took a little bit longer to find a compromising paragraph for those issues. Especially on conscientious objection, we even had a specific conference in Jakarta in Indonesia to just deal with this one topic, and I'm sure to some of these more controversial issues, we hear later specific comments from our panelists. Now, what we could tell that the most controversial issues, those were the ones that closely straddle the line between the physician's duties to patients on the one hand and their own safety rights and personal autonomy and professional independence on the other. Now, all in all, to sum up, I guess it's very safe to say that the International Code of Medical Ethics should be recognized as a remarkably high common denominator, ethically speaking. Consensus which was reached firmly and rapidly. And also the international participation and the unanimous vote, the International Code of Medical Ethics was also approved by the WMA General Assembly unanimously. This unanimous vote and the international participation by that was approved by the Physicians' Parliament of the world's physicians contribute to its authority. So there is a strong backing by the world's physicians that gather in the WMA. We think by adhering to these updated principles, the global medical community will reassure its patients and strengthen its own trustworthiness and professional standing. Ideally, the International Code of Medical Ethics should become standard reading for all medical students and doctors. And of course, one way to do that would be to include the ICoME in the curriculum of basic medical education to make all the medical students familiar with the code from the very beginning. Well, we truly think the physicians of the world are united by one global medical ethos, and I'm very grateful by the organizers that they gave the WMA the opportunity to offer this session here today, this special symposium, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussions. I'd like to thank you for your attention. And with this, I would actually like to invite all the speakers of the first session on the stage. I would like to begin with Professor Wiesing. And please, all from the before the set change. Exactly, Alex John London. I think, Angela, you're after the set change, if I'm not mistaken. That's fine. And Mohammed Rali, I think you are also. And we will ask a few more additional panelists later on to the stage. But now it's my honor to introduce my dear friend, Professor Urban Wiesing. He is a professor for medical ethics at the Tübingen University in Germany. And he has also been an ethics advisor for the World Medical Association for many, many years. I think we sort of started together with our work with the WMA many years ago. Thank you so much for being here, Urban, and the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Ramin, for this kind introduction. My presentation is a kind of support what Ramin has just said from another perspective. I would like to speak about plurality and globalization in the healthcare profession. I have to declare potential conflicts of interest. As a workgroup member, I've got reimbursement for traveling. So let me start to analyze what globalization in medicine means. First of all, we are generating medical knowledge more and more globally. Next to it, the practicing of medicine and the medical products are becoming more and more global. The next aspect of globalization is that at least some threats are becoming more and more global. The most important, well-known example is the COVID-19 pandemic. And very important for us, that patient and physician with different cultural and moral background get into contact. What does it mean for the life of a patient? It means that, and that's interesting, the experienced world in medicine is becoming culturally and ethically more diverse. This is the case for travelers who are traveling between different countries and different societies, but also within many societies. There are some societies in the world who try to prevent this development, others don't do. I think it's only plausible or highly probable that this development will go on and that globalization cannot be stopped. And the question is, is there a need for the medical profession to react to this situation? And to give an answer for that, one has to remind the function of an ethos for physicians, and the same is right for every other medical profession. I'm speaking about physicians mainly here, but everything is right for other medical professions. Well, why do they have an ethos? Well, the answer is well known. Demonstrated integrity of the members of the profession and the profession itself should generate trustworthiness, and this remains in globalization. There's no argument that this is changing. And as we have heard from Ramin, the situation for every soccer fan or other human being traveling around the world or getting in contact with the medical profession in its own society is the same. You are getting in contact with people you do not know, and you have to trust them. You allow them to treat you. You allow them to go into your body, to manipulate into your body, and you do not know them. And only because there are members of a medical profession, that's enough for you to trust them. And this principle is valid during globalization. That means the global answer of a profession to globalization is a global ethos. And I think the International Code of Medical Ethics is currently the most prominent example and worth to be discussed. Well, so far, so good. That sounds, well, acceptable, and it's not really new. But, of course, there are complexities. The first question is, what must belong to a core of global moral obligations of physicians and other healthcare professionals? What is essential? What is not essential for a global ethos? How concrete? And the most difficult question, what may be different for cultures? For cultural reasons, for different cultures. The first question was answered by Ramin, and I can only support that. The central obligations to patients, to their families, related persons, or other healthcare professionals, or to society, were more or less uncontroversial, and that's interesting. It was uncontroversial that you have to avoid harm, promote health and well-being, and confidentiality. This is known since 2,500 years. You can find this in the Hippocratic Oath. And it's interesting, nothing has changed. Also uncontroversial is dignity, autonomy, no discrimination, mutual respect, good medical practice. That's interesting. For the first time, good medical practice, a scientific criteria, becomes a moral obligation. That's very interesting for the first time in 2022. And as Ramin said, a quick and uncontroversial agreement was reached. Well, does it mean that all the problems are solved? No, they are not solved. The question is how concrete. And well, there is a principle. The more concrete the moral norm is, the less chance is there for a global consensus. This is well known in bioethics, and therefore the International Code of Medical Ethics relied on ethical principles of mid-level, well known as principlism. That means a global ethos does not make interpretation and ethical judgment superfluous. We have only principles, ethical principles of a mid-level. And we need judgment and interpretation for a concrete situation. And this is one of the points where cultural different interpretations are showing up and are unavoidable. And I think one of the first problems of such an international code is that there are ethical principles, but accepted anonymously, but the interpretations can be culturally different. And that's, I think, important to keep in mind. Next to it, there were not only cultural different interpretations, but also, that's a difference, some ethical principles, even mid-level principles, were controversial. And it is interesting to see where these principles are coming from and what they are addressing. They are not addressing the duties towards patients, they are addressing the rights of the physician. And in this moment, there is not only a different cultural interpretation of mid-level principles, but there is disagreement on the ethical principles. This is the case for advertising. Some people said, come on, advertising should be forbidden for physicians, but you know, it is allowed in several countries, and it was politically, well, impossible to change that. Help in emergencies. Some physicians from the global south that our healthcare system is a permanent emergency, And if we are obliged in any cases to submit help or to offer help in emergencies, we are always in this situation. And the most controversial one was consensus objection. And this was the case where religious influence was highly visible. In particular, religious participants or bioethicists, contributors with a certain religious background, they were in favor of a very liberal version of consensus objection. So this was the situation, different cultural interpretation and dissents about certain ethical principles. How to solve them? I'm sorry to say there is no philosophical methods to derive precisely what belongs to the global ethos and where diversity is allowed. How did the World Medical Association solve the problem? Politically. Finally, the adoption of the International Code of Medical Ethics was a political decision made by the General Assembly. I think that's only realistic. Ethics cannot solve all the problems regarding globalization, diversity, and dissensus, but at least a profession was able to set up a compromise, highly accepted compromise, but politically, not ethically. Well, who is responsible? There are two options. Such a code can be set up from within the profession or externally. And as you know, the ICoME was done by the World Medical Association, an example of ethical political self-organization of the profession. And that means this global ethos was developed by the profession itself. I think that's good because it increases trustworthiness. So, what does it mean? The International Code of Medical Ethics reflects the ethical commitments of the WMA membership representing over 10 million. You said 9 million. We have to count them once again. Represents between 9 and 10 million physicians. That's worldwide. I think that's enough. As I said before, the answer to globalization can only be a global ethos. And the global ethos of the ICoME shows that the lowest common denominator turns out to be a fairly high common denominator. And I think that is interesting. Ethics cannot solve the problems of plurality, globalization, and diversity. But a profession globally organized in the World Medical Association was able to set up a very, very strong global ethos with some controversial paragraphs, with a political decision. This doesn't solve the ethical and philosophical problems, but I think it's remarkable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Urban, for the great presentation. Now I'm honored to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Mohammed Ghali, who's a professor of Islam and biomedical ethics at the Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Doha, Qatar. I'll give you the podium, and I'd like just to remind the speakers about the 10 minutes limit so we can have some time for the discussion afterwards.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And thanks for having me in the panel. It's a great honor. I will start with, I don't have a PowerPoint. So that nothing will go wrong with the PowerPoint anymore. So I don't use PowerPoint. So I will just speak. I want to start first with set the scene by saying in what capacity I'm going to speak. So I'm not a physician. I'm not a biomedical scientist. I'm not a geneticist. My background is in religious studies. I studied religion, and from there I went to bioethics, like the early generation of bioethicists in the West who came from theology and philosophy. Yes, I have very good contact, regular, intensive, with healthcare institutions here in Qatar, and when I was also in the Netherlands, when I started my work on bioethics. I visit the hospitals, etc. But I'm not speaking now about what Muslim physicians think. So I'm speaking about the discussions within the Islamic tradition involving both biomedical scientists and physicians on one hand, and religious scholars on the other hand, and then the outcome of these discussions in relation to the points that that are focal to our discussions today. So I'm giving an overview of these discussions that are strongly interdisciplinary and that have been institutionalized since the 1980s. I spoke about this in one of the sessions yesterday. I don't want to repeat myself if we have the same audience, but just to cut it short, since the 1980s, Muslim religious scholars, in collaboration with physicians and biomedical scientists, they come together regularly to discuss a wide range of bioethical issues. Almost everything. They discussed everything that's known in the field of bioethics. This happens in 3 institutions, 2 in Saudi Arabia and 1 in Kuwait. So 1 in Jeddah, 1 in Mecca, and 1 in Kuwait. They publish their proceedings. One of the important publications that can be a good reference about the field in general is the International Code of Islamic Medical and Healthcare Ethics, published in 2005. The conference itself was in 2004. So my presentation today is about this, what happens in this, not necessarily my own opinion. I'll say my opinion here and there, but I'm speaking about what we can call a substantial part of Islamic bioethics in general. Again, stressing another point that can be a source of confusion. These institutions and what they are producing is authoritative, important, of appeal to the people. As myself, as a researcher in the field of Islamic bioethics, I can confirm that you cannot be a good researcher in Islamic bioethics without a good study of the proceedings and of the publications of this institution. It cannot be. But this is not an official, binding position that represents Islam in general. Because simply no human beings have binding religious authority in Islam. You just say your opinion, it's a matter of ijtihad, reasoning, and once it appeals to the general public, yeah, then it becomes important and so on. These institutions, what's good in them is that each country is represented. Both physicians and religious scholars, so not only religious scholars. Trans school, so you have the Sunni, Shia, Ibadi, and so on. Even way of thinking, some people are more strict, literalist, etc. Others are more, have a wider way of thinking to the issues and so on. So you have a galaxy of perspectives which makes their work appealing. But again, for the cautiousness, I'm not saying this is the Islamic bioethics and this is their position in Islamic bioethics and so on. Okay. Now, these institutions and their work, how did they engage with international documents? Coming from World Medical Association and others. We can say in general or in principle, these international documents are pretty much valued by them. They have been quoted more than once. In a separate study, I can make whole statistics about how these documents were quoted, how much times, and what kind of agreements this. But in general, well recognized, accepted as a starting point. Sometimes they refer clearly like this is a product of shared human heritage, تراث الإنسان المشترك, common morality, and so on. Sometimes they stress that these documents were not only made by Western people or Western-minded people, but everybody on earth was involved from the different continents of the world, etc., in order to convince the religious scholars that we have here something that represents the world, not necessarily a specific country or a specific mode of thinking. In principle, it is accepted, but sometimes it is not. And sometimes there are specific details highlighted, stressing the particularity of the Islamic tradition, the moral system there, how people are related to each other. There is no possibility to think of a family without marriage. So all the IVF and assisted reproductive technologies regulations and so on. But most of the time, these cautious remarks about the international documents are not speaking about a specific item in the document or the document in general. They say that it can be the implication that this is the way we are heading to, but we have to say to make it clear that this is the situation. But sometimes some international documents are taken very seriously and in details. A good example of this was the document about research involving humans, published by the CIOMS, and they made the document the basic of the discussion. This was the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences in Kuwait. They translated the whole document into Arabic. They have shown this document to both religious scholars and physicians and so on. They were divided into committees. These committees studied and reviewed the document in every item, and they made a commentary on every item saying from an Islamic perspective how this point and that point should be seen. 80–90% are in agreement, but they just highlight how this agreement can be demonstrated from an Islamic perspective. I will conclude with one example, usually introduced as something different, but then the document I speak about, the International Code of Islamic Medical and Healthcare Ethics, shows that it is not, which is the consent of women. I spoke about this in details in another session, that they stressed clearly, and anyone who is well known with the Islamic moral tradition knows already that this is the case. The authority of the woman over her body, there is no way that it is less than the authority of the man over his body. If they are both adults, they are autonomous, they can decide about their bodies, etc. So the woman decides about her body. And I have to say also in the practice, I am a member of so many ethics committees here in Doha. The informed consent, there is the person who is signing the consent, a man or a woman, etc. In the discussions, we can give details about this because I understand now from my colleagues that in the past this was not the case, and things happened and changed later on. So this is one of the examples that usually misrepresented, I would say, in international literature. I will stop here to keep the 10-minute limit, and then if there are any discussions, I'll be happy to participate. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ghali, for the great presentation and bringing the example of the informed consent between men and women. For me, as well, quite vocal when it comes to gender equality and women's rights, I do agree with you that sometimes it's quite misrepresented, and several of the global community are misinformed about the subject. So thanks for bringing that up. The next speaker, I'm glad to introduce Professor Alex John London. Is the KNL Gates Professor of Ethics and Computational Technologies and the Director of the Center for Ethics and Policy at Carnegie Mellon University. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. Great. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Dr. Ghali, for bringing us together here. And thank you for the World Medical Association for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. It's also good to have a chance to disagree with my learned colleague Urban Wiesing for a chance. So I'm going to talk about vulnerability and the conditions for socially stable and effective care. And I'm going to take up this question: can ethics provide a rationale for a single global ethos for medical ethics? I have to start by saying I have no conflicts to disclose regarding the material in this talk, although my travel here was supported by my institution that has a campus here in Education City. These are the learning objectives. I only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to dispense with reading them and go to the question I was asked to address, which is, in a pluralistic world, how do we justify the norms that purport to govern the relationship between doctors and patients? So I'm able to include the entire Declaration of Geneva on this slide. It's very short. I have some selected passages from the International Code of Medical Ethics, and I want to focus on basically the entire content of the Declaration of Geneva, because it purports to say this is the global ethos. These are the norms that ought to govern the doctor-patient relationship, whether that relationship takes place in Pittsburgh, in Doha, in the global south, the global north. And there are questions about how do we justify this given that there are different cultures with different values, where we have different weights that we would put on respect for autonomy versus concern for individual well-being, where we have more individualistic and more collectivist cultures, where we have religious versus secular identities and cultures, where we have egalitarian cultures, hierarchically organized cultures. So does that mean that there should be many acceptable ways of organizing and conceiving of this relationship that would fit into these different matrices of cultural identity? And if so, then does that mean that the single ethos of the documents that we're discussing represent a kind of cultural imperialism because they speak in a single voice, articulating a single set of norms? This would be the question that I hope to address, and I want to say, no, I don't think this is cultural imperialism, and I want to say, here's where I disagree with my colleague Urban Wiesing, that there's an ethical foundation for these norms that respects pluralism. So there are other people who have come before me who have tried to make a similar justification. I only have 10 minutes, so I hope that you'll forgive me for not having a scholarly tour of who these people are. But one thing to say is something like, well, there is a single shared universal ethical system. And then the problem with this is that it seems to deny that pluralism is very deep. A second approach is to say, well, pluralism may be very deep, but there's an internal morality to medicine. And so medicine has a common internal morality in every culture. And that problem there, it seems to just simply deny the assertion that pluralism could extend to medicine. The third approach is the political one that Dr. Wiesing discussed, which is there's an overlapping consensus of reasonable views, that 10 million physicians from a wide range of countries around the world that embody these different cultural norms can come together and they can recognize and justify and ground the same set of conclusions from a wider range of premises that are drawn from their shared cultural tradition, their shared religious tradition. I think that is true and important. I think it doesn't go far enough because we can always ask, well, pluralism seems to be a fact. If different cultures do share a common conception of medicine, why is that the case? Why is it the case that cultures can have different conceptions of many, many things, the way the family ought to be organized, but they would have the same conception of medicine? And if there is an overlapping consensus, then the philosopher wants to know, is that because it's a happy accident? Or is there something that is deeper that explains the reason why people drawn from different cultures, drawing on different moral traditions, can still find a justification for the same moral conclusions? I think things are actually worse if we want to think about the problem that pluralism poses, because pluralism doesn't end at national boundaries. It doesn't end at community boundaries. It doesn't end at the door to your mosque, your temple, your church. It doesn't end at your family. Pluralism often goes all the way down. We talk about intersectionality, where the idea is we have identities that cross many different forms of personal identity, who we love, how we think about our bodies and relate to them, the shape of our eye, the color of our skin, the heritage from which we come, the God that we worship or don't worship. These things can divide us and mean that there are tables, even within our own culture, at which we are not welcome, from which we are excluded, where we are marginalized. And so differences in value can go all the way to inside of a family, inside a religious organization. And so if pluralism poses a problem at the level of culture, then it poses that problem all the way down. I think it's wrong for us to look for our commonality at the level of our values. The commonality is in our shared plight. We are fragile and dependent. We are born without beliefs, dependent utterly on other people. And if we are fortunate, our dependence on other people allows us to organize our life in a way where for a brief flickering moment, we can pursue some conception of the good before we descend back into dependence and die. Our shared plight is shared with the highest king and the lowest peasant. It is inescapable and structural to the human condition. Medicine is the mechanism that we together create in order to assist one another in being able to extend the brief candlelight in which we can pursue a conception of the good for ourselves. Medicine is the science of addressing our physical and mental vulnerability to illness, to injury, to disease, and the institutions that it takes to provide this good, because you can't provide it yourself. It's a socially provisioned good. Those institutions won't be stable and effective without the willingness of individuals to submit to them. If you're afraid to be anesthetized, if you're afraid to give access to your body to the person who's providing care, you won't go to these institutions, and the moment that you have of what you can approximate as independence will be shortened. In game theory, there's a game called indirect reciprocity game, where C observes A's interaction with B. So if you'd like to think this now, some patient ideally would observe the interactions of other patients with the medical establishment. And then the question is, if you could observe the way other people interact with the medical establishment, would you trust that establishment? This condition of transparency and then full information about the norms that would govern that institution, I think it follows then that the probability that people will be willing to submit themselves to medical care is higher the degree to which those institutions have committed themselves to fidelity to the individual's well-being and to respect for the individual's conception of the good that they have formed for themselves. Pluralism arises in that respect for the diversity of individual conceptions of the good that people bring with them to the hospital. But that pluralism, to survive, must be ensconced in a global ethos that says respect for the individual is respect for that pluralism, but respect for that individual cannot be compromised. And that unwavering respect for that individual is what allows healthcare institutions to remain stable across the many changes that we experience in our globalizing world. Changes in cultural values, changes in cultural norms, changes in technology, changes in individual beliefs and values. Those, you can expect them. They're part of our world. But for these institutions to remain stable and effective, people must always trust them. And an unwavering commitment to confidentiality, respect for individual difference, respect for individual autonomy is the bulwark that leads people in the midst of all kinds of disagreements to go and be willing to make their body available to a stranger, as my colleague said, who all they know about them is that they wear the mantle of the medical profession. So what I want to say to you is pluralism is deep, it's real, but for it to be respected, we need a global ethos that says, while we are vulnerable, our shared vulnerability, medicine is what ministers to our ability to, for some brief moment, be able to pursue some vision of the good. Those visions of the good can be very diverse. But our ability to do that depends on a stable and effective social institution that can extend the time that we have before we each pass away and die like the people who came before us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, and thank you for sticking exactly to the time. Very much appreciated. And now we get to the panel discussion, and I would like to ask
two additional panelists who will join our distinguished speakers here today. One is Dr. Nancy Decker. Please come to the stage, and Dr. Hassan Shamsi Pasha. And while you're finding your way to the stage, and please have a seat, I'm going to introduce you real quick. Of course, you know Nancy very well. She served as the president of the International Association of Bioethics from 2022 to 2024, and she's a professor at the University of Washington School of Medicine. And Dr. Hassan Shamsi Pasha, thank you for being here today. He is a consultant cardiologist at the Medical Reference Center in Jeddah. He is the author of impressive 71 books on different health and ethical issues and 120 papers. Thank you for being here, and thank you for joining the panel.
Thank you very much indeed for giving me the opportunity to be with you today, and this is really great meeting. Thanks for the organizers. I would like just to take you back to the history of informed consent, just in the next 3 minutes. And we know that there is very little evidence in the literature that formalized informed consent appeared before the late 19th century. In fact, informed consent for research is thought to be actually originated from the Nuremberg Code in 1949. And the fact that there are actually informed consents dated back long time before this. Dr. Kamil Ajlouni in 1995, he actually wrote a paper, showed a documented informed consent, which came from Turkey in 1677, and that actually contained most of the requirements of the informed consent we see nowadays. Even before that, actually, Dr. Degiri from Istanbul, in a paper published in World Journal of Surgery in 2022, he documented a case of 21 informed consents for hernia surgery. And both Muslims and non-Muslims had signed contracts with surgeons in the court, in Sharia court, before undergoing surgery. And these actually showed that the risks and complications were expressed to the patient and explained to him, and he actually got approval of all these risks. In fact, there is also another report which showed or document an informed consent back to 1524, which is exactly 500 years ago, and that actually for removal of bladder stone, and that was reported in Annals of Saudi Medicine in 2014. And this actually consent implied a strong relationship between the physician or surgeon and the patient, and they had very good contractual agreement about the surgery. So I think in summary, the informed consent dates back longer than what appeared in the Nuremberg Code in 1949. I beg your pardon. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hassan, for this quick statement. We would also like to give Nancy the opportunity to say a few words before we dive into the panel discussion. Please, Nancy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be a part of this very important conversation. I would like to highlight provisions of the Declaration of Geneva and the International Code of Medical Ethics that can be understood as speaking directly to armed conflict. From the Declaration of Geneva, I highlight the physician's commitment to non-discrimination, which states in part, I will not permit, quote, considerations of creed, ethnic origin, nationality, political affiliation, or any other factor to intervene between my duty and my patient. From the International Code of Medical Ethics, I highlight the physician's commitment not only to the health of individual patients, but to the health of populations. The code states, quote, "The physician has a responsibility to contribute to the health and well-being of the populations the physician serves and society as a whole." Pertinent to both passages, I ask the speakers to address the role of physicians and also bioethicists during periods of armed conflict. Bioethicists, I believe, have dealt with war in a limited fashion, focusing primarily on clinical and research topics. But of course, war is much broader than that. War represents a public health crisis. After all, malnutrition and disease, not battle injuries, have been the primary causes of death in wars around the globe. How can physicians and bioethicists engage with war, especially as a public health crisis? Calling attention to its impact on war zone populations on both sides of an armed conflict, especially the women, children, and other marginalized groups who are disproportionately impacted, and the social determinants of their health that are devastated by war. And I have 3 specific questions that I hope we will have the opportunity to address. First, do you think medical ethics can and should force a reckoning with war's wider consequences for public health? And if so, how can the Declaration of Geneva and the International Code of Medical Ethics, the principles and values articulated there, which principles apply? Should we incorporate more directly principles of public health ethics and a duty to protect social determinants of health for war zone populations? So should we force this reckoning? If so, what values, what principles can be brought to bear? And finally, how should physicians and also medical ethicists contribute to public health during war and during the post-war period? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your important remark and bringing in a different perspectives when it comes to war and conflict. Indeed, it's a public health crisis, but as well as a humanitarian crisis going on beyond just public health. You asked very important questions, so I would like just to pause for 2 minutes to see if there are quick reflections from our esteemed panelists to Nancy's question that perhaps you would like to respond to that before we open the floor to questions from the audience. I'll pick. Urban, do you have some reflection from your side?
I have to answer to Alex, because he said there's a disagreement between us. Let me explain it. I do not doubt that ethics plays an important role, in particular ethically founded principles, ethical principles of physicians to patients. No doubt about this. But the reality regarding the rights of the patients is another one. There was and there is no ethical agreement on the question which kind of consensus objections are allowed for a physician. That's reality, like it or not. And it's only realistic to assume that this will not change within a foreseeable future. There is now a kind of consensus in the ICoME, but it was adopted by the General Assembly. And I have to remind you, the General Assembly is not a moral institution. It is a political institution elected by national medical associations. And the only thing that was possible, like it or not, was a political compromise adopted by a political institution regarding consensus objection where there is still no ethical consensus. That's how the world is. I would like to have an ethics that solves these problems, but there isn't one.
Alex, do you want to respond to that? But then I want to give the floor to Dr. Hassan. I know you hold the mic to answer a couple of the conflicts. But just Professor Alex first.
So if actually what I'd like to do is respond to
Yeah.
Dr. Jecker's. I mean, I'm happy to engage this further, but I'd like to respond to Dr. Jecker's very important questions, because I think there are two types of institutions relevant for this debate. Human rights institutions, so I used to serve on the Forensic Science Steering Committee for the International Commission on Missing Persons. That was a human rights institution. Its job was to identify the remains of people who were murdered in genocide and then bring perpetrators of human rights abuses to justice. And the International Criminal Court is the institution that we relied on for that, and so the institution brought Milosevic, for instance, that was one of the prosecutions as an example of a human rights institution. There are then humanitarian institutions, that's like the Red Cross, where they view themselves as not a participant in conflict, but that they're there for the well-being of the people who are afflicted by conflict. And I feel very strongly that the norms of medical ethics and the norms that are represented in the documents that we're talking about support very strongly the idea that the institutions of medicine should be humanitarian institutions, that when people are injured, they should cease to be regarded as a combatant in wearing the uniform or bearing the allegiances that they have, and that they should be ministered to as an individual whose health and well-being is at stake, and that the larger ramifications of war, which brings famine, disease, and suffering on a massive scale, that those things are fundamentally public health issues, and that there's an obligation on the part of the medical community to speak out inside our own communities to try to make sure that we mitigate as far as possible. So first of all, I think war should not be, there should be fewer wars, there should be fewer conflicts, and we should advocate for that. But when wars exist, then we also need to advocate that the collateral damage of war be a fundamental moral issue that we mitigate and avoid as to a greatest extent possible, and we need to hold our leaders accountable for doing that.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hassan.
Thank you very much indeed. I would like just to say something, one word about the role of family. The role of family in the informed consent in this part of the world is extremely important. And there is no single word in the document about the family role. Yes, there is a patient representative, but not family role. We cannot have been in cardiology for the last 40 years, and we cannot take a patient for cardiac catheterization or cardiac surgery without informing the family about the procedure. Yes, of course, informed consent of the patient is essential, is a must, but I think it is our duty as physicians or surgeons to inform the patient's family about the procedure he is going to undertake.
Yeah, and hopefully after the consent by the patient to actually inform the family. And thanks for flagging that. I would like just to open the floor for questions from the audience or even comments. First, Dr. Talia and my colleague in the front row. Maybe we can take two comments and then we go back to the panelists.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed all the talks and, of course, learned a lot from them. But there's one question that keeps on worrying me, and I've raised it oftentimes, particularly, Nancy, that you raised the issue of wars and ethics and obligations. Now, we've been teaching the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols to our students, and we advocate for it. And also the Geneva Convention when it comes to health, the World Medical Association, Helsinki, all of them. But my question is the following. We keep on teaching them, and yet we keep on seeing that they are violated almost each and every day, and there's nothing done about these violations. So my question is the following. Do these remain hypothetical constructs that we teach and we aspire to, or for them to be really viable and to have a meaning, they need to have a practical application, not just a theory? So how do we apply them on the ground? So that's mainly my question. Thank you.
Thank you for the question of legality and if they're actually binding or not. Let's take one more question and then we go back to the panelists.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good morning, everyone. My name is Miriam. I am a physician and a genetist with a special interest in epigenetics. And I represent a big patient group. I established around 6 NGOs. And it was an eye-opener for me, where I believe what we are discussing today, it will go nowhere if we don't involve the patient group, especially if we talk about the International Medical Society. I believe even if we have the General Assembly, again, I do agree with you, sir. In any document, I believe patients should be involved before this General Assembly approve it. The other point where I believe also it's really essential to involve insurance. If we talk about any medical services, regardless of the region or the conflict, if we don't get the insurance on board, sitting along with a panel, I think we will go nowhere. And if we don't get Red Crescent, if you don't get the Red Cross on board with us, we will not go beyond that. In my opinion, I think with these two people or two elements, we can have much well-organized safety net for our client and our patient. So I would like to have your input and opinion about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that important statement. And of course, including the general public as representatives of patients and persons is quite important, and hence why we have the public consultation processes. But I would like just to look at our esteemed panelists to see if you would like to address any of these questions. First, in relation to ethical documents, if they're really applicable, something that you can actually apply in practice, how can you make them binding? And then the second question, in terms involving patients, insurance, and just not beyond the limited medical world. I see you're holding a microphone. Urban, you want to jump on that? Please go ahead.
Yes, I think that the case of family is a typical case for such an international document. This document could not address the precise roles of families because it is a global document, and I can assure you the role of families in Germany is becoming more and more complex, yes, for the developments. And that's a point where the culturally different interpretations are coming. We have a general rule, and of course, this rule will be differently interpreted in different cultures. I think that's the only way such an international code works. It cannot work in describing precisely what a family is and what it has to do. That's not possible. To the patients, yes, there is always an online debate on documents, about documents, new documents, and revised documents, and patients are requested to be engaged. And I absolutely agree with you, patients must be engaged and they must be involved. Absolutely right. The problem is there are many, many organizations of scientists, scientific communities, and so on in the world, but there isn't an international organization of patients. And for the WMA, it's difficult to have a certain partner and to address it. So that's the reality. Yes, I agree, patients must be involved, but it's in reality not always easy.
Actually, there are many international organizations representing patients, but I agree we have to bring them on board. Just Professor Alex and Yassine Mohamed Ali have her hands up as well, please.
I just want to say, I think that this comments about the lack of respect and abiding by global international agreements is fundamentally important. So as a philosopher, I can be naive about these things, so forgive me when I say the following. I think a danger of too much of the embrace of pluralism is that we, the individual people who don't control the levers of power, sacrifice our ability to speak in one voice to the people who control the levers of power, and that we need to do more to reach across the aisle with our shared humanity and vulnerability to say that there are certain norms that we expect to be upheld even as states go about carrying out their perceived agendas, and that the strength of having people across regions, dialects, religions, advocate for the same norms, humanitarian norms, would be the only way to put pressure from the bottom up on our political leaders to do more to abide by shared international agreements. This is why people in my profession are put to death.
Thank you so much. And then we'll take your response, Dr. Mohammed Ghali, and then perhaps one more question from the back, please.
Yes, very quickly about this, the gap between the theory and the practice. I'm very much in favor of having these transnational, transcultural, transreligious agreements. Not by imposing on people, but sitting together as equal partners, we come to conclusions. I tell you, from my background, this is possible, this is not possible, and then we will see that there are agreements by default. Of course, there will remain disagreements. So we need to have these things, because now what we have been witnessing the last couple of years, and the situation is getting worse and worse, the violations of these agreed upon principles, which makes part of common morality, has been so systematic, so consistent, etc., to the extent that the young generations started to lose the trust in the very validity of these agreements, that there are no disagreements. Because we have these violations, so actually there are no disagreements, and it's a matter of power. If I have the power, I have the right to do what I want. And here comes the great risk from an ethical perspective. I can do all the violations, but they will remain violations. So people who launch war, they have a narrative. They must have, it's not only weapons. So I come to the international podium and I say, I'm doing this in the name of protecting my nation, protecting liberal values, whatever. There must be a narrative. Why there must be a narrative? Because there are things we agree upon. If we touch these things, and the reference point will be missing because we see violations and this is very dangerous. So there is a difference between we feel dissatisfied, upset, quite angry about what's happening. This is one thing. And the other thing is to say there is no need for reference point, because there is no reference point, and these international documents do not mean anything. This is quite dangerous, much more dangerous, because we have to feel guilty of what we are doing, at least. And we feel guilty because we know that we are violating something we agreed upon. So I feel we are heading into a quite risky, much worse than what we have now.
Yes, we are, and that's why we're having this panel discussion, to raise those differences and to have like a safe space actually to share your opinion. We have 2 minutes left, and I saw some hands at the back. So for the gentleman with the blue shirt, if he can get the mic. If you can stand so they can see you. Thank you.
Thanks. Owen Schaefer from the National University of Singapore. I wanted to ask about interprofessionalism. I know the Declaration of Helsinki has been expanded recently to try to go beyond just the scope of physician involvement in research. And I wonder whether it's timely to think about expanding or looking for a similar expansion of scope for the Code of Medical Ethics. Because for two reasons. One, it's already at a level of generality that is applicable to many other professions. But moreover, a recognition that actually most healthcare, we talk about the importance of maintaining trust in healthcare, is delivered not by physicians, but by nurses, pharmacists, allied health professionals. And I know it'd be a lot of work working with other international associations of nursing, pharmacy, allied health, but maybe this is a project worth considering. That's all. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a quite very interesting question, as actually the World Medical Association is one of the founder for the World Health Professional Alliance, where we share several ethical values, and we invite them to join our consultations and dialogues. And that alliance includes physicians, nurses, pharmacists, dentists, and I'm missing one, Otmar, physiotherapists, yes, where we convene together and discuss several of these issues, because as you said, those ethical documents does not only apply for physicians, but we keep saying this applies for the healthcare practice and healthcare professions, and definitely healthcare workers are part of that. I think we are a bit running out of time, so I'm looking at my panelists if they want to share just a few final words. If not, we can close this session, and I would like to thank again our panelists and the audience for your participation. But the symposium is not over yet. We're going to have the second part of the symposium with more experts and other panelists who will join us in the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. And please, as Lujane said, the symposium is not over yet. We're just going to have a little set change while we invite our panelists and speakers to take their seat in the audience. We would like to ask the chairs of the second session of the symposium to the stage. First of all, Dr. Ottmar Kleuber, the Secretary General of the World Medical Association, and we would like to, ask Professor Wiesing to stay on the stage, and we would hand over the mic to you guys.
Thank you very much, Ramin, for your introduction. And I have, I give the microphone back to my co-chair, who will invite the other speakers of this second session to this stage.
Yes, I have to do what Ottmar just said. Please, Angela, may I introduce you? Angela Ballantyne is an associate professor at the University of Otago, Wellington, New Zealand. She was president of the International Association of Bioethics from 2016 to 2017 and was the ethics member of the Central Ethics Committee in New Zealand from 2010 to 2018. Her research interests include exploitation, research ethics, vulnerability, ethics of pregnancy and reproductive technology, and secondary use research with clinical data. She has worked in a wide range of international settings, including Australia, England, Europe, and the United States. That means she is a global expert. Please, Angela, the floor is yours. You want?
We got the slides? Yeah. Okay. Just waiting for the slides. I need the clicker, do I? I know, but I'm just wondering where the slides are. Oh, well, it's up there. Okay, great. Is that going to come up for that? Okay. Kia ora koutou. This is in the language of the Indigenous people in New Zealand, the Maori people. I say tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Welcome to today's session. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I'm going to go back there. Okay. So I've been asked to talk about conscientious objection, and I think that's really timely because if we're interested in pluralism, the part of the International Code of Medical Ethics that is right at the face of pluralism, the section that was most heavily debated, was conscientious objection. And why is that? To answer that, we need to think about what conscientious objection is and how it functions to distribute power between patients and physicians in society. So I do have a declaration of potential conflicts of interest. I have received funding from the generous World Medical Association to attend the conference in Jakarta. So the definition, I'm going to start with the definition because part of what's tricky in this space is there's still quite a lot of controversy in the literature about what different people mean by conscientious objection. So it's helpful for you to at least know what I'm talking about. So I like the Australian Medical Association definition. Conscientious objection occurs when a doctor, as a result of a conflict with his or her own personal values, typically religious or cultural values, refuses to provide or participate in legal legitimate treatment for a procedure. So the key thing to understand here is that on the one hand, you have a medical treatment that's legally authorized in that country. It's clinically indicated for the patient. It's supported by professional consensus and standards. And the doctor, we could talk about other allied health professionals, the health provider is refusing to participate or to provide that treatment based on a personal value of their own. Now, there's lots of other reasons why a doctor might refuse to provide a service. They might say, I'm not adequately trained in that area, right? Or I don't have the appropriate support or context or support staff to do that safely. Those aren't examples of conscientious objection. So what conscientious objection does is it creates a bubble around the physician of professional autonomy. Now, outside that bubble, there are all the regulations and professional standards that control how that health provider should provide medical services. And the reason we have all those regulations and standards is for a few reasons. We want to ensure that patients have access to safe and effective care, but we also want consistency. So we don't want it to be a lottery when you turn up at the doctor and then they open the door to find out what kind of care they're prepared to provide. So we want consistency on that hand. So that's why we have all of those regulations and kind of state coercive power telling doctors how to practice. So why do we have the bubble then? Well, the reason we have the bubble, well, there's a few different reasons. Some people think that it's really important that doctors are able to practice in line with their own moral integrity. And that's an inherent value. Some, which is more my position, instrumentally think that allowing doctors this bubble of professional autonomy reduces burnout, and we're all well aware of the, in many countries, issues of burnout and people leaving the medical profession. But for me, the thing that's really valuable is diversity. So I work in the medical school, I'm not a doctor, but I want to support and facilitate a diverse health workforce because research shows that patients do better when they have the option of being cared for by people who are similar to them in particular ethnic, cultural, and sometimes religious ways. So diversity for me is a really high value. And if we want ethnic diversity in the medical workforce, often that comes along with religious and cultural diversity. Okay, so we're trying to balance those two sets of values. Consistency on the one hand, diversity on the other hand. So most countries allow some kind of capacity for conscientious objection, that bubble. And really the debate is the bubble very constrained so that there's not much professional autonomy, or is that bubble a lot wider where there's much more scope for doctors to decide how they'll practice? So in terms of the literature, there's sort of two extreme positions. Ed Pellegrino, who's a Catholic physician, was a Catholic physician in the United States, has argued that ethics of medicine is grounded in the ethical obligation that is peculiar to what it means to be ill, to be healed, and to offer oneself as a healer. So this position almost says, you know, that bubble should be open-ended. It's really up to the doctor to determine how they practice, and they must practice in line with their conscience. At the other end of the spectrum, we have, for example, Julian Savulescu, a philosopher and doctor currently at the National University of Singapore, who has argued that a doctor's conscience has very little place in modern medicine, and doctors who are not prepared to provide legally endorsed care simply shouldn't be doctors, right? So that's saying there's no bubble at all. So you can start to see why this was a really controversial element for the International Code of Medical Ethics. And as Raman said in his paper in the Journal of the American Medical Association, when they launched the revised edition of the International Code of Medical Ethics, it quickly became apparent that this issue was the most contentious of the document. And the reason I propose is because it is the issue that is most at the face of pluralism, right? Where we see that tension, that friction between trying to support a medical institution that is trustworthy, that is recognized, that has recognized values in a pluralistic society. And so really this is the pointy edge of the challenge in front of us. So where did the code land? So there's quite a bit of text here. The first part's sort of introductory. So we can start in the second section. So this is the current position of the World Medical Association. Physician conscientious objection to provision of any lawful medical intervention may only be exercised if the individual patient is not harmed or discriminated against and if the patient's health is not endangered. And the physician must immediately and respectfully inform the patient of this objection and give them the information they need to get timely access to alternative care. So in my view, this is actually a very strong normative position. In terms of how big that bubble is, it's quite a tight bubble. It allows some conscientious objection, but it does prioritize patient access to care. So providers can only object if the patient is not harmed, discriminated against, or their health is not endangered. And obviously there's a requirement that you can provide information. But I think when we're thinking about globalization and pluralism, it's exceedingly important that we don't just talk about this in the abstract, you know, in these kind of conferences amongst philosophers, what should the rules be? It's so important that we consider research from social scientists and we consider the practical implications of how these rules might be interpreted on the ground. So what does this mean in practice? Note that it is still the patient's obligation to find another provider. So there's no obligation to refer, for the physician to refer the patient on. And if we think about health systems, the physician really has a monopoly expertise right to practice and expert knowledge of that health system. Often it can be very difficult for a patient to know how to navigate that system and find another provider. So there's no obligation to hold the patient's hand and get them on to the next provider. And crucially, it's sort of open-ended as to who is supposed to determine whether harm has happened. So it seems to me that this sort of puts the burden or the capacity to judge squarely within the physician's domain. So essentially, in practice, what would happen is the physician would have to decide, do I predict a certain likelihood of harm for this patient in the future if I decline to provide the service? And so that really centers the physician's perspective rather than, for example, the patient's perspective. And I think it was an important question we had earlier about really listening to patients and their experience of engaging with health systems. And there's an open-ended question as to whether other providers are actually available. So the World Health Organization estimates a shortfall of 10 million health providers globally by 2030. Even in New Zealand, we're seeing real pressure on our primary health services and a difficulty in even being able to get standard appointments. This is a graph showing how far people travel to access medical care. The dark blue purple sections are people who are traveling a day to access medical care, and the purpley regions are people who are traveling for 5 hours to access medical care. So for those patients, simply accessing another doctor may be exceedingly difficult. So let's turn to the social science literature quickly and ask this question around what's actually happening in practice. So in theory, doctors can't object where there is harm. But unfortunately, so much of the literature says there is harm, right? There's consistently harm in a plurality of different health systems. So we look at a range of different countries, there's harm. So the World Health Organization released a paper in 2022 that looked at 26 studies from 26 countries from 2010 to 2020, and a whole range of countries, so Australia, Brazil, Colombia, Zambia, the USA, the UK, Norway, Tunisia, so a plurality of different health systems with different religious and cultural backgrounds. And what they found in those studies was that conscientious objection contributes to increased abortion-related morbidity and mortality and imposes significant burdens on women and girls. So the overwhelming conclusion here was that allowing that bubble for doctors results in harm. Now, the other thing that's really obvious when you look at the literature and the practical reality on the ground as opposed to the theory is where the focus of conscientious objection is. So when we look at the literature, there's all sorts of things that are discussed. So obviously abortion, pharmacists refusing to provide access to contraceptives, euthanasia, refusal to treat gay and lesbian couples and infertility, objection to the practices of surrogacy, for example, objection to providing information about vaccines, whole range of different things are discussed. If you look at what's actually happening on the ground, it's all about abortion and women's access to reproductive care, right? The vast majority of times when doctors do express conscientious objection, it's to limit women and girls' access to reproductive care. So it's really important when we think about the globalization of medicine that we are grounded in that reality, not in the kind of abstract perspective in the literature. And so what the WHO found was that allowing conscientious objection leads to increased morbidity and mortality for girls, leads to uncertainty and a lack of trust in the health system. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but just to show you that there is a substantive amount of literature demonstrating harm. Now, what might this mean? It might mean that when we interpret the WMA's position on conscientious objection, we say, well, there's almost overwhelmingly always harm, so that means that doctors don't actually have a real right to conscientiously object. And I think that's it's something to challenge going forward. I mean, in terms of the World Medical Association's engagement with lived experience on the ground, with evaluating how these procedures and how these provisions actually play out in reality. So I'll leave it there, and I guess what I've hoped to show today is that debates around conscientious objection are really interesting and valuable because they really highlight that coalface issue of how to navigate pluralism, cultural, religious, geographic pluralism, and how to establish and trying to maintain trust in medical institutions in the face of that pluralism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela, and please stay with us here on the stage. And I have the pleasure now to call to the rostrum Dr. Faryal Kamis. Dr. Kamis is a senior consultant and head of the infectious disease department at the Royal Hospital in Muscat, Oman, where she chairs both the Antimicrobial Stewardship Committee and the Infection Prevention and Control Committee. As an expert in her field, Dr. Kamis is also member of a number of national committees and task forces that advises the National Ministry of Health in Oman. Dr. Kamis has authored several publications in scientific journals and has contributed to several national infectious disease-related guidelines and hospital guidelines. And she is going to address us on patient autonomy from an Islamic perspective. It's up to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for the invitation to be here. It's a pleasure, really, an honor. So I'm going to talk about autonomy. Can we have a global acceptance of a unified standard? And my focus is not from the Islamic perspective, but from a Muslim physician as well, because that's quite different. So we all know what is the importance of autonomy in bioethics. Self-governance, ability to govern on self without intervention from an external authority. You have to have voluntarily informed and made competently in order a person's decision is regarded as autonomous. It's a very important principle of ethics and the modern bioethics. Every person has the intrinsic value and personal liberty. However, in this perspective, it has its gaps or it has issues, because we talk always about the constructive notion of patient and doctor relationship, the interaction, and sometimes the issues of benefices, and I'm going to explain how that might have an issue when we talk about personal autonomy of individuals. Also, the concept of autonomy in the Western culture emphasis on individuals rather than societies. However, this is not absolute, and this is the key message, because if you can see during the pandemic, and this is where my work comes, during the pandemic for surveillance, for tracking, for vaccination, there was refocusing of values or what is regarded as principles of ethics. So we went from autonomy of individual to greater good of all. From individual interest, we went to solidarity, community, and from patient-centered, we went more into the world population, the global public health centers. So beneficence and non-maleficence superintended here autonomy. So if for the goods of others, I can change or weave the autonomy of individuals for surveillance, vaccination, for public health mitigation measures. So why not, if this is related to God, at least in some of the cultures? And from here, it was very obvious, like there was a larger acceptance by Muslims than Western cultures for the public health interventions during COVID-19 pandemic. Because of these different principles, the focus of community, the focus on minimizing harms to individuals, and also the duties and obligations we have as Muslims towards the other people. So principles of autonomy in Islam, Islam acknowledges the principle of autonomy as God declared man as his vicarious earth, and he said we have honored Adam's children. Also, you can see that there are many verses in Quran that have cited here that accept freedom of faith, and this is a main thing as well. So external autonomy, God is welcome to intervene in Muslims' person's autonomy. This is a volunteer choice that we make. It is also an ethical commitment that we have for an obligation for the religion. And we also have similar obligations to family, society, and public interest. We are in agreement This is the main thing, because agreement is on, the freedom. We are born free, inherently free, and also this is also, a strong point in Islam, but we divert in the submission to God. So the key points I want to make here: Muslims voluntarily, narrow the sphere of autonomous self-determination, and absolute autonomy is rare from the Islamic perspective, because there's the right of God, the community, the family. And let's take, for example, suicide and euthanasia. It was mentioned earlier, right of an individual, because that individual has free will, have capacity, and has autonomy. But the prohibition comes from the self is something that God has given us. So unwarranted taking of life is a grave sin in the Muslim culture and religion. The oath of the Muslim doctor includes an undertaking to protect human life in all stages, under all circumstances, doing utmost to rescue it from death, malady, pain, and anxiety. And we can go on and forth. So this prohibition against suicide and euthanasia, the human being in Islam is entrusted with the body, with the youth, with the fortune, and from here comes these principles as well. There's the second thing, an example that there is autonomy is not absolute, and this is from the medical intervention. So while as a patient, there is a right to choose and decide, there are some exceptions where you override that autonomy, and these are in emergency situation, life-threatening, to save an immediate, where you require an immediate action. If the patient is minor or mentally deficient, or a guardian refuses the treatment, immunization, similar to when happened during COVID pandemic, and cases where are related to women, sometimes in certain circumstances as well. So this is just to summarize that there are some topics and differences as well when we discuss the autonomy from the Islamic perspective. Also, there is a role of families, and that was mentioned very clearly in the previous, by the previous speakers. So family plays a major role in the culture and also Islamic perspective in medical decision. And often family bears the burden of cost, whether we talk about families in Africa or family in the eastern part of the globe. This is an important perspective. And for Muslim patient, absolute autonomy is rare, because family needs to get involved in these decisions, and they need to be part of decision making for that patient. And I want to go also into the doctor-patient relationship. So while informed consent is very, very important, and we need to be really honest and provide the best information that we can provide the patient, but there is also, we are, as Muslim doctors, are required to have a softer attitude and give hope. This is not wrong hope, but there is, because life is not in our hand. So we are required to give this hope to patients, especially the elderly or patients who are suffering from serious diseases. So again, we have to also, in our culture, to explain to the patients the amount of information they want to know. Not everybody needs all the information, or they want to hear all the information. So from the autonomy perspective, it's important to give them that right. Sometimes when I talk about cancer to my patient, they tell me, talk to my son or talk to my daughter. She's the one who's responsible for these, all these medical decisions. Don't talk to me. So I have to respect that perspective and autonomy. However, we are changing. And now with the education, we are now, giving more information, and patients are requiring us to give them all the information. So this is something important. And I want to say that it's very important that what was mentioned, that the two important things that needs to be included in the ethics to accept all these differences is the respect for human life as well as dignity. And those are the key things. The final two slides, this is again the perception of a Muslim physician. Muslim basic autonomy, is it fulfilled under modern medicine? As a patient, do I have the right to ask for the same gender doctor to treat me? It's important for me as female. Right to cover for females when we are in operating theaters. Do I given that right or not? Right to pray, right to fast, right to be cleaned. Can I refuse a Foley catheter if it is not needed? Can I refuse a colostomy bag or not? So these are some of the important considerations in this era when we are dealing with the with the consent. And then we had beautifully by Angelina, she described the professional autonomy. What, as a physician, as a doctor, and a Muslim, or from cultures, what is my opinion regarding abortion, gender change operations, surrogacy? These are important things to discuss and probably to move from discussion to maybe putting it more into practical terms. These are my final thoughts. Many conceptual points of agreement do exist between the Islamic and Western views in biomedical ethics, including concepts of autonomy, beneficence, justice, and non-maleficence. However, applications, implementations might be different. The concept of unified standard of medical ethics seems unwarranted at this point. Bioethics needs to expand its vision and acknowledge cultural variation, diversity, moral traditions of other cultures. Although autonomy remains a central tenet of bioethics, it should not be absolute, and it should have now the engagement of patients, as it was brought there, families, physicians as well. Physician participation and beneficence, it enhances patient ability to make an autonomous choice. So it's not contradictory, it is complementary. So Muslims often choose to voluntarily exercise a narrower sphere of autonomous self-determination. This is submission to God and submission to our religion. Islam urges all Muslims to actively engage in acts of justice, and justice is a key thing when we deal with patients on day-to-day basis. Autonomy in Islam, it incorporates the interests of not just the individual, but consideration of family and also the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kamis. Please sit down here. And thank you for this interesting presentation. And I would like to invite Dr. Ensan Shamsi. I hope I have pronounced it correctly. Dr. Shamsi Goski has served as Associate Professor of Medical Ethics at Tehran University of Medical Sciences, Secretary of the National Ethics Committee in Biomedical Research at the Ministry of Health and Medical Education, Senior Advisor and Secretary of the Medical Ethics Committee at Iran Medical Council, Secretary of Medical Ethics Group in the Iran Academy of Medical Sciences. And next to it, he has such a long list of international engagements that I would like to summarize it. He is a global expert. And please, the word is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. It's my honor to present in this prestigious meeting, and thank you, World Medical Association, for inviting me, and thank you for the great organizer of this meeting. Thank you, Angela. You made my work very easier for explaining about conscientious objection. But before starting that issue, I first want to share a very important point about my opinion on this cultural diversity and respecting culture. I think, as you can see in this slide, the board is going to be more homogeneous regarding culture. We see every culture everywhere. And we need to consider this kind of homogeneity at the global level. And more important, the process of heterogeneity in the local cultures. So I want to say, I need your permission to oppose some proposals on respecting, all local cultures. And I look at this as a process toward a kind of moral relativism. And I think that we need to be aware that it's not anymore possible to label all person in one geographical area to have one culture. It's a kind of a stereotyping people and labeling them, because nowadays, as a person who comes from basically from Iran, and I know the region, the Eastern Mediterranean region, I can tell you there are many, many diverse opinions on different aspects of medical practice in this region. So I see a kind of passive response to this respecting cultural diversity. And I think that cultural diversity, respecting cultural diversity is one thing, and respecting all diverse cultures is another thing. So I will expand on this in another talk today afternoon. But I wanted to share this opinion. So as you can see, the commitment of healthcare professionals for providing healthcare for all without discrimination is manifested in the word professional. Word professional could be interpreted with the word profession and confession. Profession means when we publicly explain and commit ourselves to provide healthcare for everyone. So conscientious objection could be in a kind of contrary to this public availability of our medical practice. So, and this is the point that it's a sensitive issue, as you mentioned, Angela. So it's contentious because it's against our public profession to provide healthcare for everyone. The next point is, in some situations, maybe it's important, it's justifiable to override the patient's therapeutic beneficence, but we need to be careful about patient therapeutic beneficence. It's different with confidentiality or privacy, because therapeutic beneficence is the core goal of medicine. I think autonomy, justice, and other principles are just helping us to do this. And from a professional point of view, I think this is the core idea. So conscientious objection is targeting this core goal and idea of medicine. So it's so important. As it was mentioned, there is a wide understanding, wide divide about understanding of conscientious objection. Some people are just incompatibility thesis. Some people think that it's absolutely open for physician to do and not to do what they want. But I think that the World Medical Association position is a kind of conventional compromise on this. And there are two main moral principles here. First is the principle of no harm, and the second is principle of justice, or more specifically, no discrimination, or not discrimination. So when we look at this, World Medical Association Declaration of Geneva also urge us to practice our profession, I'm a medical doctor as well, based on our conscience and dignity. So on one hand, we have the International Code of Medical Ethics of World Medical Association. On the other hand, we have the Declaration of Geneva, then ask medical professionals to keep their integrity. So on one hand, we have the individual integrity of the healthcare professionals. On the other hand, we have the patient's rightful access to health services. Here, I want to discuss two cases to show that the present frameworks for conscientious objection are not sufficiently expanded to respond, as Angela mentioned, to all needs, and we need to expand those aspects. The first one is something mainly in Islamic culture. There's a kind of sensitivity about being touched, or very direct physical contact, or even visual contact with people who are not relatives, or and unrelated people from the opposite sex. So some healthcare professionals as well have this point of view. And this, as I know, and I have been in touch with some of these people, and this is a really deep belief. Mainly, for example, I know a women dentist, and when you look at the dentistry daily work, it's very close, physical contact with patients. And also, for example, in cases like genital visits and, it's like urology, you can see that, and some people are not really happy with these things. Maybe somebody from the one part may argue some people shouldn't come to this profession. But now they are there because their understanding was that, yeah, we can go, but just visit female patients or male patients. This is one issue. So one possible framing of conscientious objection is if patients' access to healthcare is not compromised, then conscientious objection is permissible when the underlying argument is attributed to the deep moral or religious beliefs of the healthcare professional and not the characteristics of patients. So some people think that when it's related to ourselves, we can object. But when it relates to characteristics and factors of patients, then we cannot. It's discriminatory. So, but in this case, I think that this distinction doesn't work. So many people think that this is our belief, those healthcare professionals, not to touch or not to be in contact with, physical contact with patients. The second case that I want to raise is issue about biopolitics and the political impact on conscientious objection case. I have two cases. For example, in the United States, the conscientious objection to providing abortion is on a matter that is politically debated. So what is the implication here? This is a political act. This could be. And in other countries, for example, in Iran, conscientious objection to providing healthcare to patients from the opposite sex. We know the Iranian government nowadays, there's a social gap or social opposition from some Iranians, many Iranians, about policies that try to just separate male and female in different social settings. And, just imagine a patient, for example, a healthcare professional who refused to provide healthcare to the opposite sex in a country with a non-democratic political system that restricts the rights of women in selecting their wearing as a part of broader policy of male-female separation. I'm not going into politics of this. I'm not the person to do this, but this is the reality of the scene. And if a healthcare professional just refused to provide such the healthcare service to patients only based on this issue, and even if it's based on his or her deeply believed, opinions and religious beliefs, still it's a kind of relation, and it could be counted as a political, act. So, are these healthcare professionals implicit in the government act? Is their act should impact the public trust to healthcare professionals, which is also very important for us from a professional point of view? And could we count for or label this as a political act? This is another question. To answer this, the Article 29 of the World Medical Association International Code of Medical Ethics. Angela covered that issue, and it's again a kind of no harm and no discrimination framework. In Iran, for years, I was the senior advisor of the President of Medical Council of the country, and we established two main documents in Iranian context, and one of them I think is unique. It's the Healthcare Professionals Charter of Rights, and the other is Iran Medical Council Code of Ethics. both of them touch the conscientious objection. The code of ethics implicitly reject those objections because it's not targets the idea, but the Charter of Rights of Healthcare Professionals permits healthcare professionals to object to some health services. Again, the framework is based on the no harm principle, but there's one important issue. We discussed it, we debated for days for this Article 55 of the Charter. The problem was it's not possible to just, the abortion was the case, was the example in the text, but we have other things. At that time, we didn't know, is it possible for us to permit female physicians to just object to provide dentistry care, for example? So the result was that we are not prepared for this. Then we put a framework that the list of those things that physicians could object to provide them should be ratified and approved by the medical council. It's not an open list of everything that we can object. So unfortunately, this list is not prepared, and I know that it's very hard to be prepared. And I can conclude that conscious objection is a complex, really complex issue, as it was mentioned. And present frameworks that rely on general principles of no harm and non-discrimination, I think are too general to respond to the needs in this area. And there's no data in many parts of the world about the impact of conscious objection to providing healthcare to patients. Other factors such as local culture, social accountability, and biopolitical issues should be considered as well. Beliefs on which objections are justified should be systematically evaluated. I don't think that physician could decide on this. On the other hand, we need to have a kind of systematic approach to just determine which acts physician could object to. And finally, the present position of World Medical Association should be, I think, expanded and more specific to cover more specific conscientious objection cases. And finally, again, thank you for inviting me and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Isan, for your presentation. And we now go into a little bit expanded round in our panel discussion with 3 more panelists. We will call them one by one. And the first whom I would like to ask to join us at this stage is T.C. Wu from Singapore. He is educated in philosophy and medical jurisprudence. Dr. Wu is head of the Office of Ethics in Healthcare at SingHealth. He is a faculty member of the SingHealth Duke NUS, that's the National University of Singapore Medical Humanities Institute, where he co-leads its bioethics and health professions education programs. He researches on ethical issues in healthcare, biomedical research, and infectious disease emergency, and has contributed to policy and guidance in these areas in Singapore and internationally, in the IAB, for instance. Teck Chuan sits on various institutional national level committees in Singapore, including the National Medical Ethics Committees. Please have your short statement, TC.
Thanks. So I'll be speaking on informed consent. I was speaking to 2 elements, the limits of disclosure to a patient and the role of the family in decision making, something that Dr. Faryal Khamis has spoken on. So I'll just jump right in. My first comment is on paragraph 15 of the International Code of Medical Ethics by the WMA. And the paragraph 15 goes like this. The physician must obtain the patient's voluntary informed consent prior to any medical care provided, ensuring that the patient receives and understands the information needed to make an independent, informed decision about the proposed care. So the focus here is on any medical care. And this is something very scary to people, especially to physicians practicing in litigious society or whether there's an increasing rate of medical litigation, right? So the term obtain voluntary informed consent prior to any medical care provided may be taken to mean that there's a need to seek consent for every new change in care, treatment, or even simple routine procedures like switching fever medication for a patient in a hospital. So you know, when you're hospitalized, you may undergo many interventions and procedures, and some are so minor and low risk. So the question is whether there should be professional judgment on when to disclose certain information to patients, like risks and benefits, alternative treatment. And the procedure is actually minor, routine, low risk, and so forth. The second comment is on the role of the family in decision making. Even in Eastern societies and even in places like Singapore, which is quite contemporary, there has been argument for family autonomy in decision making, right? And this can mean less controversially that the patient is a relational being and therefore need the support of family members to make a decision, either by himself or herself or together as a family. But there may be more controversial one where, as has been argued by some people relying on Confucian bioethics, to say that the family should have the right to tell the doctor not to disclose the information to the patient, including the patient's condition, and the doctor should respect that. Right, so that is a more controversial form. It's effectively a waiver of informed consent by the family. So there's actually a gap in the Code of Medical Ethics by the WMA on waivers and when this is justified. So one question to the panel is, what is the role of family autonomy? Should we go so far as to allow the family to collude with the doctor, so to speak, to hide certain information from the patient? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now like to introduce Professor Gamal Serour from Egypt. He is a professor of gynecology and director of the International Islamic Center for Population Studies and Research at Al-Azhar University. He is also clinical director of the Egyptian IVF and ET Center, Mahdi, in Egypt, and past president of the International Federation of Gynecology and Obstetrics. Welcome to the stage, and please start with your introductory remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my great honor to be here and join this panel. Well, I was asked to talk about conscientious objection. And after we have heard the excellent talks about conscientious objection, I'm going to take you to the practical background, because I am a physician working at Al-Azhar, and we had the first international conference on bioethics research in human reproduction in the year 1991, and we established the first bioethics committee in the year 1994, and we put guidelines for this particular issue since 1994, and this will we did recognize the fact that we are now living in a small world. Both physicians and patients are moving from one country to another, and even in the same country, there are different people with different ethical, moral, and religious perspectives. And therefore, we have to consider this into consideration whenever healthcare provider is providing his service to his patients. And in this regard, that healthcare provider should not really impose on their patient practices which contradict with the moral background and with the ethical background of the patients. And if the patient needs a treatment which contradicts with the conscientious conviction of the doctor, then it is a duty of the doctor to refer the patient to where she or he could have the treatment, as the treatment is based on scientific grounds. Furthermore, that if the patient is asking for a treatment which contradicts with the patient with the healthcare provider conviction, then it is his duty to provide this patient to refer the patient to where she could have this treatment. However, in cases of emergency, and if there is a life-threatening, then the physician should really provide the treatment which is life-saving for the patient if he cannot identify an alternative in due time without the patient come into harm. As much as the physicians have to respect the conscientious conviction of the patient, also the physician has the right to respect his own conscientious conviction. In other words, doctors should, or healthcare provider, should not be obliged to provide a treatment which contradicts with their own conscientious conviction, and consequently, they have to be, they should not come to any punishment or discrimination because they are not providing such a treatment. So it is mutual respect between the patient and the healthcare provider to have respect for the conscientious conviction of both. And the doctor or healthcare provider should not refrain from providing life-saving procedure for the patient, even if he or she has a conscientious objection to this treatment. You know, I want to take you to the practical application of what really we have been hearing. It is an important issue. It is bound to happen in different countries because doctors keep on moving, patients keep on moving, and in the same society as well. I mean, in Germany, there are Muslims, there are Germans, you know, there are the people who belong to different faiths. So I think we have to take this consideration. The excellent guidelines which were mentioned, we should take it into practical application. And I'm talking for this because I am a practicing physician. For example, sometimes I get a patient who is coming for treatment of her infertility, and she needs in vitro fertilization and embryo transfer, but her age is 47. And then I say, well, look dear, you know, your ovarian reserve is almost nil. I cannot provide you treatment here because egg donation is not permitted. And then she would ask me, so doctor, what are the other lines available? Then I would say, yes, you can go for egg donation. And then she might ask for my advice, where could she go? I could tell her she can go to Spain, she can go to Lebanon, she can go somewhere else, you know, where she could have this egg donation. Vice versa, when a doctor is working in one of the units of IVF, say in Europe or UK, and he is asked, say, to participate in donor insemination. And it is his right to say, sorry, you know, this is against my conscientious conviction, and therefore I cannot perform this procedure. And it is the right of the physician to refuse participating in this issue, but he should refer the patient to one of his colleagues where he could provide this. Having said this, the final word, that the doctors also, or the healthcare provider, should not come to suffering if they provide evidence-based healthcare service because this differs from the conscious of the society in which they are practicing. Like what happened to the healthcare provider who provided vaccination in Afghanistan, Uganda, and Yemen, where they have been attacked because they were providing vaccinations for the children. So they got to have the protection of the society and the regulation and the government in which they are practicing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Siroor. Finally, and not last but not least, I have the pleasure to call to the stage Professor Ahmed Kitami from Oman. He is going to address us on justice and beneficence in relation to autonomy and non-maleficence. Professor Kitami is a lecturer and secretary of the National Bioethics Committee of Oman. He is also vice chairperson of the UNESCO Intergovernmental Bioethics Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me for this enlightened panel discussion. And my work has been made very simple from the various speakers, including my college mate, Dr. Feriali, on his presentation. And regarding beneficence and justice in Islamic perspective, the principle of autonomy, for a number of factors, namely doctor knows best paternalism, insurance, and many court cases have made the principle of autonomy very powerful in comparison with other principles, at the expenses of making beneficence and justice, as termed by Dr. Hassan in his book, as a lost value, terming justice as a lost value. And this is because of autonomy being very powerful in our day-to-day life, in healthcare and outside healthcare systems. Now, beneficence, as a Muslim bioethicist, we look at it not from what is termed as Samaritan, a good Samaritan, whereby in Islam, beneficence is a duty. For example, a doctor or any person seeing somebody drowning and he doesn't save. If he saves the child from drowning, well, then he's a good Samaritan. But if he doesn't save and the child dies in the swimming pool, and he has the reasons to justify why he did not rescue the child, maybe in a hurry, he doesn't know how to swim, or whatever it is, so he will be considered as a bad Samaritan. There's no code of conduct. But in Islam, beneficence is a duty. You are commanded in the primary sources of Islam, Quran and Hadith, that you have to act beneficently. And that's the reason why, for example, Peter Singer said that we should have 10% of our resources to help the poor. That is the concept of Singer. But that concept has been stated 1,400 years back as a compulsory duty to every enabled rich person to take out his 2.5% to help the poor. Compulsory. خذ من أموالهم صدقة تطهرهم. Take the health from the rich and give it to the poor. And then, as a Sharia law, as a Muslim sometimes commit sins. And some sins, you have to, first of all, you have to ask forgiveness before God. And then there's a punishment for that, that is, you have to feed about 10 people, to help 10 people or 30 people, depending upon the sin you have committed. That is another resources of social beneficence. And a third source is whereby, for example, now we talk about justice. Justice as a lost value, we have got what is called social justice. We witnessed during the COVID-19, where some countries were having the first dose, while others have finished the booster dose, because of unequal distribution of justice. And for this reason, Islam has made justice as a very powerful, put together with beneficence, as a very powerful tool, of a powerful principle, in a sense that governments are obliged by command to provide health, to provide housing, to provide even employment. And that's why health insurance in some of the, for example, here, Qatar and others, are not existing because of the social justice available, providing free health, the same as we have in Oman. And that's a nutshell I want to say, to draw the difference between beneficence in Islamic perspective and relative to autonomy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your introductory words. I have to look at my watch. We have only 4 minutes left. Ottmar Kloiber will give us a conclusion. And I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience, and I kindly ask you for a brief question and a brief answer. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes, there is one.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for your presentations and for your contributions. My name is Manal, and I was working as a clinical pharmacist a few years back, and I was working in a cancer center. So we were working as an interdisciplinary team approach, multidisciplinary team. And so we faced cases where the son or daughter of a patient requesting not to inform them that they do have cancer. And on those situations, allow me to sit down. So in those situations, I had mixed thoughts and feelings because I was thinking the patient has the right to know that he has a cancer or she has a cancer. Because in Islam, we believe in the day after. So maybe they want to pray more, they want to read Quran or whatever. On the other hand, the kids, they don't want to break the hearts of their parents, or they don't want them to feel sad, especially if the parents are too old and they have wrong understanding of cancer. So in this situation, I am interested to understand your thoughts with this regard, where to go and what is the best, ethical approach.
Thank you very much for the question. I think that everybody of you could give an answer to that, but looking at our time, who wants to give an answer? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. A very important question, but I think the top priority is the patient. We talk about patient, chemotherapy, treatment, going through vomiting, other side effects. The right is for the patient to know. So we do face these things always with patients' relatives, especially for HIV. Don't tell my parent they have HIV. But we do sit with the families and engage them in the treatment plans and assure them that the amount of information that we will give to patient, that's the key thing, how much information you are giving. And sometimes you could agree on the amount of information. You don't need to give the 5% more survival rate. Maybe that part you can omit, but you have to give the whole truth. The disease, the prognosis in general terms, and the hope, as I said. So we can't obey to families when they say, don't talk to our parents, relatives regarding their diagnosis. You have to.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the clear answer. I'm sorry we are running out of time, and we should give Ottmar Kloiber the opportunity to give us a conclusion, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our speakers, to the audience, and to the organizers for having this symposium today with us, with the World Medical Association. And we have tried to look a little bit into the principles of pluralism, but also the limits of pluralism. And we have done this by looking into a few, and by far not exhaustive, number of questions that challenge the pluralism and our view on pluralism. Vulnerability of those who we care for, the informed consent and what it means and how deep it can go and where are its limitations. And that led us also to the question of patient autonomy and what does it mean in a society where the family context is still very important and valid. We have looked onto the question of conscientious objections and how that is in relation to our professional obligations and our obligations to treat patients. Certainly, questions which we could go on with and we could spend certainly much more time with as we have done in the past, and I'm sure we will in the future. To me, very personal, I think some limits for pluralism are clear and have become more clear. It should not lead us into a complacency about morality and ethics, number one. And number two, and maybe more important, it should not lead us to any negligence for our own obligations towards responsibility. Thank you very much for being with us here this morning, whether here in the room or online. And once more, thank you very much to our excellent speakers in the first and the second session.